bridge at dawn. The town of Silverbrook was small, a place where everyone knew each other, and the river that cut through it carried stories as old as the town itself. At the heart of the river stood the Willow Bridge, a place where lovers carved their initials and promises, where young dreamers watched sunsets, and where time seemed to pause. Amelia Hart had grown up with that bridge in her sight. She was an artist, often seen with a sketchbook in her hands, capturing the way morning mist curled above the river or the way lanterns glowed in winter nights. For her, the bridge was more than wood and stone, it was a sanctuary. Ethan Cross had only recently returned to Silverbrook after years of working in the city. He had left behind skyscrapers and late-night deadlines, searching for something quieter, though he wasn't quite sure what. His parents still lived in town, and while he claimed he had returned only to help them, there was something in his heart, an emptiness he couldn't name, that had guided him back. One dawn, while Amelia sat sketching the bridge, Ethan crossed it. He paused when he saw her, the soft light painting her face in shades of gold. For a moment, he thought she looked like part of the river itself, timeless and serene. She glanced out, surprised to find someone else awake so early. "You're up before the sun," Ethan said with a small smile. "So is inspiration," Amelia replied, her eyes sparkling. That morning became the first of many. They began meeting on the bridge, sometimes by accident, sometimes by choice. She sketched, he watched the river, and slowly, their silences grew comfortable. Ethan learned that Amelia's parents had passed years ago, leaving her the little studio by the riverside. Amelia discovered that Ethan carried scars from a life in the city, where love had been fleeting and ambition had cost him peace. One evening in late autumn, lanterns lit the town for the Harvest Festival. Music floated across the river, laughter echoing. Amelia stood by the bridge in a crimson dress, her hair catching the glow of the lanterns. Ethan found her there, holding a sketchbook against her chest. "Why aren't you at the festival?" he asked. "Because the bridge feels more alive to me," she whispered. "It's where stories begin." Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "Maybe ours begins here too." The weeks turned into months, and the bridge witnessed their journey, confessions under the stars, arguments softened by apologies, and dreams spoken in hushed tones. Yet, winter brought challenges. Ethan was offered a position back in the city, one he had worked years to achieve. The night before his decision, they met on the bridge once more. Snowflakes drifted around them. "Do you want to leave?" Amelia asked, her voice fragile. Ethan looked at her, the weight of choice pressing on him. "I want to. But I don't want you to be the reason I give up everything else." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. "And I don't want to be the reason you regret staying." Silence hung heavy, broken only by the river below. For a moment, it felt as if the bridge would lose another story to distance. But Ethan reached out, cupping her face gently. "The truth is," he said softly, "the city never felt like home. Not once. Here, with you, I found what I didn't even know I was searching for." Amelia's breath caught. "Then stay. Not because of me, but because this is where your heart belongs." Under the falling snow, Ethan kissed her, and the bridge became their witness once more. Years later, Silverbrook would tell their story. About the artist and the man who returned. About love found at dawn, under lantern light, and in the quiet strength of choosing each other. Their initials were carved deep into the Willow Bridge, an eternal promise that some love stories, once begun, never end. The Garden of Silent Promises. Evelyn sat at her favorite corner of the library, surrounded by tall shelves and the faint smell of old pages. She was sketching quietly in her notebook, lost in a world where time seemed to pause. It was in this quiet place that she first noticed him, a young man with dark hair, his sleeves rolled up, flipping through a book as if searching for something far more than just words. His name, as she later learned, was Daniel. Their first encounter wasn't extraordinary. He had asked if he could borrow her pen because his had run out of ink. She smiled, handed it over, and returned to her drawing. But something lingered, an invisible thread between them, delicate yet undeniable. Days turned into weeks, and the library became their unspoken meeting place. Sometimes, they exchanged nothing more than a smile. Other times, they spoke about the books they were reading, or about life in fragments. Daniel loved history, while Evelyn painted the world with colors that only existed in her mind. They were different, yet their silences matched perfectly. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted golden streaks through the tall windows, Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "Would you like to see my favorite place in the city?" Evelyn hesitated, but curiosity and the warmth in his voice won her over. He led her through winding streets until they reached a hidden garden behind an old church. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine, and ivy curled around stone walls like something out of a forgotten storybook. In the middle stood a bench, weathered by time but sturdy, facing a small fountain that trickled softly. "This is where I come when the world feels too heavy," Daniel confessed, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. They sat there in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Evelyn sketched the fountain, while Daniel watched her hands move across the page. Finally, he whispered, "It feels like you've been part of this place all along." Their visits to the garden became a ritual. Seasons passed, and with each visit, their bond deepened. Evelyn painted the garden in every shade she could imagine: spring blossoms, autumn leaves, even the quiet hush of winter snow. Daniel, in return, told her stories of forgotten kings, battles lost and won, and ordinary people who had changed the course of history. But the truest story was the one they were writing without words. One evening, as rain tapped gently on the stone paths, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small blue box. Inside lay a silver locket, plain yet timeless. "I don't have the right words," he admitted, his voice trembling, "but I don't want this, us, to ever be just a memory. Evelyn, will you stay with me? For every season, every silence, every tomorrow?" Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded, unable to speak. She placed the locket close to her heart and whispered the only words that mattered. "Yes. Always." The garden of silent promises became their place, where laughter bloomed, where tears found comfort, and where love lived not in grand gestures, but in quiet devotion. Years later, when the ivy had grown thicker and their hair had turned silver, they still returned to that same bench. Hand in hand, they watched the fountain, carrying with them the gentle truth they had always known. Love is not about how loudly it is spoken, but how deeply it is kept. Beneath the lantern sky. On a warm summer evening in the old town of Hoyen, the streets glowed with thousands of lanterns. Their colors shimmered on the surface of the Thursday Bon River, where small boats drifted lazily under the golden light. Among the tourists and locals, a young woman named Mai walked quietly, her heart carrying the weight of a longing she couldn't quite name. Mai had always loved this town, the narrow alleys, the fragrance of jasmine tea, the laughter of children chasing each other under the lanterns. But tonight felt different, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. On the other side of the river, Daniel, a traveler from far away, leaned against the railing of the bridge. He had come to Hoyen for the history and the beauty, but lately, he had been searching for something deeper, something beyond photographs and souvenirs. His eyes wandered across the crowd until they stopped on Mai. It wasn't just her appearance that drew him in. It was the way she moved, as though she belonged to the lantern light itself. She seemed to carry a quiet sadness, and Daniel found himself wishing he could know the story behind her eyes. Fate, as it often does, stepped in. When Mai's small paper lantern slipped from her hand and floated toward the river, Daniel instinctively moved forward. He reached down, catching it just before the water swallowed its light. "You dropped this," he said, holding it out gently. Mai looked at him, startled, and then smiled. "Thank you. I thought it was gone." And in that moment, just a glance, just a smile, something began. They walked together that night, through the maze of lantern-lit streets. They talked about everything: Mai's dreams of opening a small bookshop by the river, Daniel's stories of distant cities and endless roads. The world around them faded until it felt as though they were the only two people left in the town. Over the weeks that followed, Daniel stayed in Hoyen longer than he had planned. He learned to drink bitter Vietnamese coffee the way Mai did, and she began teaching him the language, laughing whenever he mispronounced a word. They spent evenings by the river, releasing lanterns into the water, each one carrying a wish they never spoke aloud. But as every traveler knows, time is not always kind. Daniel's visa was ending, and his flight back home loomed closer each day. Neither of them dared to talk about it, but the silence pressed heavily on their hearts. On his last night in Hoi An, they walked once more beneath the glowing lanterns. The festival was at its peak, music filling the streets, but for them, it felt unbearably quiet. Mai stopped by the riverbank, her hands trembling slightly. "When you leave," she whispered, "will you forget this place?" "Forget me?" Daniel looked at her, his chest aching with everything he couldn't put into words. Slowly, he took her hands. "I could never forget you, Mai. You are the reason this place will always live inside me. And no matter where I go, I'll carry you with me." She closed her eyes, and when he kissed her, the lanterns above seemed to flicker brighter, as if the whole town was blessing their love. The next morning, Daniel left, but not without a promise. One day, he had said, "I'll come back. And when I do, I'll find you, beneath the lantern sky." Years later, when the lanterns once again lit up the river, Mai stood outside her little bookshop, a dream finally realized. And as the crowd moved past her, she felt a familiar presence. She turned, and there he was. Daniel, smiling, holding a lantern in his hands. "Mai," he said softly, "I told you I'd come back." And beneath the lantern sky, their story began again.